I would say that was worth the 90-day wait. Holy Hannah, what a race. You've got the Outlap F1 podcast. This is season 7. This is episode number 3. It's our first race review of the season. It's the 2025 Australian GP race review show. You have got Andy, and I'm along with Cody tonight, and we are, I think, finally have recalibrated our sleep schedules. I don't know. It may take until Wednesday, and then China's going to come and just destroy it all. But anyway, it's the life we choose to lead. Cody, my man, how's it going, and how you doing?
It is going great. I slept in really late today to get my recovery in. It was definitely worth staying up late for it, though, because, like you said, holy crap, what a race. I don't know what I was expecting for the first race this year, and it had me on the edge of my seat several times, so well worth it.
Yeah, we are going to talk about the day that Mother Nature showed up and the literal lap that Mother Nature decided to show up and test everybody. And I do mean tested everybody. So we're going to get into all that in just a little bit, but we've got an entire weekend also to talk about as well. So if you have found our show, and a lot of you have actually over the weekend, we have kind of gotten Blue Sky up and going. It was nice to get some nice interaction with some folks over the course of the weekend. So if you have found us for the first time, welcome along. We're glad you're here. You can find us on that Blue Sky app or Twitter, still X. We're still putting content on over there. I was doing a lot of dual posting across both platforms over the course of the weekend. So if you enjoyed some of the content, again, we're glad that you did. So you can find us there, Instagram, Discord, Reddit, and of course, YouTube. At Outlap F1 Podcast is the handle for all of that. See our link tree as to where you can find all of our content. If you're on YouTube and you happen to like what you're hearing and you enjoy what you're watching, you can click the like or the subscribe button. That would also help us out. If you're on your favorite podcasting app, a 5-star review also helps us out to come up a little bit better in search results. Helps us get our content to you that much quicker. So if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we would appreciate that. Email the show. You can always do that. Chat now at outlapf1.com. Outlap F1 Nation, who continues to support the show. Thank you so much to all of our monetary supporters, including Dean Warwick, Yuri Dolchester, Paul Weaver, Quentin Warden, Kevin Kelly, Regan Stanzik, Timothy Brown, and of course, Jonathan Scott. If you'd like to become a member of that hashtag Outlap F1 Nation, we put our anchor page in all of our show docs or show notes as well. You can see it there. $1, $5 all helps us to maintain the equipment we have, get some new equipment into the program, all in an effort to try to keep the show as technologically relevant as we can. All right. Well, we will just hop right in because this weekend was just kind of felt like that. We just kind of all hop right in. We're going to start with our headlines of the day. Cody, what you got?
I've got McLaren won as expected, but what a wild ride it took to get there. After qualifying, McLaren looked ominously quick. We all thought after testing that they were going to be the best car. They were downplaying themselves a little bit, saying, I don't think we're going to be that far out ahead. And then in qualifying, they ended up being quite a bit ahead. And during the race, they looked like they were going to be really, really ahead. But the race got really nuts several times. And at the end of the day, the gap to the front was very small.
Yeah, just when you thought you were done, you had one more round of potential heart attack to come. I think the appropriate question in my headline is, I think the question is, what didn't happen in this race? I think we got, if you are an F1 fan or if you are even new to the sport, you pretty much saw just about everything. You saw crashes before the race. You saw some people crashing in the race. You saw weather, changing tricky conditions. And we even had some stewarding things that happened after the race that changed the result, just in case, you needed one of those as well. So you got your cross-section of what the sport has to offer. And that rain, boy, when it came, it changed just about everything. Some fortunes rose, others fell. We will talk about all of that. But before we do that, we will start, as we are apt to do, with our qualifying recap. And if I can actually tee up the sound, I have it. Sorry, a little out of practice. All right. So Saturday, which was dry, it was run in the dry. It was actually very hot, a little bit cloudy, but dramatically different weather to Sunday. And it saw, all right, going out in Q1, this poor guy had himself quite the weekend. I felt so bad for him. Ollie Behrman in the Haas did not set a time as his car was in pieces parts yet again. P19 was Esteban Ocon. Ouch. Both Haas cars pushing up the back of the grid here. That's not a good result considering they did no quali runs in testing. P18 Liam Lawson. Ouch again. The second Red Bull seat still in the back. P17 Nico Hulkenberg. Kick Sauber. Yeah, a little bit better. At least they beat Red Bull. Let's look at that. P16, Kimi Antonelli almost made it out of Q1, but P15, Gabriel Bortoletto put together one hell of a lap at the end of Q1 to knock Antonelli out. P14 was Jack Doohan. P13 was Lance Stroll. P12, Fernando Alonso. P11, one of the stars I thought for qualifying for me, Isaac Hadjar on debut, almost cracking the top 10. The top 10 from 10 to 1. P10, Carlos Sainz. Williams' form looks to be real, but only able to get in P10, but others did a little bit better for Williams. P9 was Pierre Gasly. P8, Lewis Hamilton on debut for Ferrari. P7, there we go, was Charles Leclerc in the other Ferrari. So Ferrari's not looking quite as competitive as we thought that they would, especially coming out of testing. P6 was Alex Albon. There's the good form for Williams showing up. Pretty much, I think, all of the potential that car had. Good going for Albon. P5, other star of qualifying, Yuki Tsunoda in the Racing Bull. I saw a lot of memes says, Helmut Marko, would you look at him now? Great effort in Q3 and not even shown on television. It just kind of happened. He was the last guy to set a lap time. P4 was George Russell. P3, getting absolutely, I thought, everything out of the car, was Max Verstappen. P2 was Oscar Piastri, who took a dramatic last lap lead, only to be pipped by his teammate in pole position, Lando Norris, with a 1:15.096. All right. Wow. First qualifying of the session of the season. Sorry, I'm not quite in mid-season form. I will get better, I promise. But Cody, big takeaways from the qualifying.
There was a lot of big takeaways. First competitive session of the year, and we'll start at the front. It looked pretty close, actually, between just about everybody. You know, those top four teams. Well, Ferrari, as I'll get to in a second. Ferrari maybe not looking as great, but like between McLaren, Red Bull, and Mercedes looked pretty close right up until like those last times in Q3 where both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri opened up a pretty sizable gap to the rest. And that was the first point where I was like, maybe this isn't going to be as tight as we were all hoping for. And we saw a little bit more of that in the race. So I think it is pretty ominous what McLaren has managed to do with the car. You know, there's plenty of room for development throughout the season, but they're definitely starting off on the right foot.
Although they did not make it easy on themselves. Both Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, Oscar almost had an off, and Lando did have an off and had his lap time deleted. So going into the final runs, they were P4 and P10, respectively. And then all of a sudden, you know, the last lap, they both nailed both of those laps, and they were so close to each other. I think 8/100ths of a second, which is nothing. But they did manage to open up a gap, 4/10 to Max Verstappen, and I thought Red Bull did a wonderful rally job. They brought something like 15 updates to the car since testing. So whatever they obviously identified something that wasn't working, and they obviously fixed a lot of the problems. It's not all their problems, but they certainly addressed a lot of them, at least allowed Max to do the Max thing and be a factor, and he was right there up until the end. But yeah, like you kind of did mention, the two McLarens did manage to pull a little bit of a gap in qualifying. I'm more and more excited the more I see it. So early advantage, I'll definitely take that. Other notes, didn't see the Ferraris. I think everybody thought Ferrari would be a lot more competitive. Both of them, some issues in Q3. It looks like they went a little direction in setup that probably didn't agree with the car. And you still got Lewis Hamilton kind of learning the car, as we definitely saw throughout the course of the race. George Russell, I thought, was impressive in the Mercedes. And again, Yuki Tsunoda, probably the star of the qualifying session. Who saw that one coming? I think both racing bulls looking very good in quali.
Yeah, both. Let's see here. Both Yuki Tsunoda and Alex Albon looking really good in qualifying, out qualifying both of the Ferraris. So anyone who was hoping that Ferrari was going to come into this where they left off last year, just on McLaren's heels, I'm sorry to say, you're probably going to be disappointed for at least the first few races.
Yeah, there's definitely some development that I think both Ferrari and Red Bull are going to have to probably put into this car. I don't think they can just close up shop and focus on 2026 if they want to be a factor this season. But yeah, the Williams form. I mean, Carlos Sainz was topping sessions, especially early, even in practice. We kind of saw that even in testing, that he had the ability to do that. Just didn't put together a Q3 lap. Otherwise, I think he would have been right there with Albon in that maybe sixth or maybe fifth position. Certainly Williams early on, definitely punching above their weight. And that, I think the Vowles effect is a real thing. Watch that team, especially next season. But I think they're going to turn some heads this season for sure. All right. So we shall flip over the script and get into the now very, very wet Sunday. It was so wet, in fact, that the F3 race got shortened because the epic rain showed up. And then the F2 race didn't happen because the epic rain showed up. And when I mean epic rain, trying to watch this broadcast, they stayed on the air for about an hour and a half. They tried to get this race in. They went out 3 different times. It was bad. Every time it seemed like they would get a break in the weather, another wave of water would come in and it just, trounced all over the track. I was not sure this race was actually going to start on time. I was actually very worried about it. But right after the F2 race kind of got called, it eased up. It eased up a bit. It eased up a lot. So that even by the time we got to the race, the vast majority of just about everybody was on injured tires. So, at least we were able to get a normal start. We started on time. But then it all kind of kicked off early. We will start with our back markers. There are a lot of DNFs here, and a lot of them are drivers that don't have a whole lot of experience, but it kind of didn't matter. This race kind of claimed just about all levels of experience, believe it or not, from rookies to some of the more experienced drivers who've been driving for a very, very long time. So we're going to start with the first DNF. That was Isaac Hadjar. Tragic story of Isaac Hadjar in this race. Did not set a single lap because he crashed on the formation lap. Very, very kind of difficult scene to see. He was very, very upset about it. Also not classified with Jack Doohan, Carlos Sainz, Fernando Alonso, Gabriel Bortoleto, and Liam Lawson. At different points throughout the race, the conditions got to one or all of them. The only 2 in the back markers who actually finished were the 2 Haas's. Oliver Behrman, who finally actually got some laps in, and Esteban Ocon. So that concludes the back markers, but there's a lot in here. I guess we can kind of start with Hadjar. Cody, take us through what you saw there.
What we saw in this race was like a baptism by fire for most of the rookies, and it was pretty ugly there in the beginning. We saw Isaac Hadjar not even make it around to the starting grid because he spun off during the formation lap, which was really unfortunate. You could see on the broadcast that he was really gutted by what happened. I'm sure he was hoping to make a much more impactful debut than that, especially since he qualified quite well for his Formula One debut, and that just that all went out the window before he even had a chance at a racing lap. However, it was pretty cool because it was Anthony Hamilton, Lewis Hamilton's dad, was shown on the broadcast trying to comfort him. I guess Hadjar is a really big Lewis Hamilton fan, so that was good to see. You have to have a little bit of compassion for the guy. He's only 20 years old.
Yeah.
He's really young. He's trying to make it at the highest level of motorsport, and when something like that happens, even someone who's tough as nails is going to be feeling that. So. I felt really, really bad for him on that. Jack Doohan didn't make it a whole lot farther because he spun out on the first racing lap, and his car was pretty well wrecked. So that isn't going to help his case a whole lot. We've been talking into the lead up to this that there's a pretty good chance that Jack Doohan isn't going to be staying in that seat for the whole season, which is really too bad because those conversations started before he'd even really had any chance to show anything. And this was a bit of a rocky start to that, so I'm sure we're going to hear those conversations just keep going and going. But it was not just the rookies. Carlos Sainz went off on his own during the safety car, I think on like lap 2, so he didn't really get to show what he can do in the Williams yet. Fernando Alonso went off quite a bit later in the race, but also went off on his own. There were parts of the track where it was very slippery. We saw a lot of issues with people kind of skimming into the gravel trap at one point on the circuit. A lot of drivers had issues with the slippery white lines on the track. There are a lot of them because this track is not a dedicated racetrack. It's public roads, most of the year. So there's a lot of lines on the track, and yeah, it was rough for everybody. I don't remember exactly when Liam Lawson went out, but Gabriel Bortoleto went out like pretty close to the end of the race and had the chance to really impact the finish.
The Lawson spin was at the same time as the Bortoleto one, so they both kind of wrecked together and caused what turned out to be the last and final safety car. But yeah, I mean, Alex Albon, I was listening to an interview he gave after qualifying, and they all mentioned the rain. Somebody mentioned the rain, and he just looked up and said, yeah, it's going to be a tough day for the rookies. And he was very, very right. Hadjar had the spin, obviously, before the race started. Doohan had a similar spin on the first actual racing lap. Carlos Sainz couldn't keep it behind the safety car. Some sort of torque setting gave him a whole lot of extra power he was not expecting. Fernando Alonso, it looked like just a product of maybe some worn intermediate tires, because everybody at that stage of the race was trying to make their tires last because there was threat of more rain. The Bortoleto one, it looked like he had survived most of the big part of the weather, and he had gotten back onto the inner tire, and again, he just had a moment, I think, on a white line. And Liam Lawson, who tried so hard and at one point was actually up to P9 and then kind of throws it away again, helping to cause the final safety car. It was such a tricky, changeable race. I think Martin Brundle even said every corner there was an opportunity to have a crash. And the 16 drivers that survived, or the 14 drivers that ended up surviving it, were the ones who survived it from attrition, because I think everybody at least had a moment. Max almost had a moment. Antonelli, who we're going to talk about in a little bit, he had a full spin. Leclerc had a full spin. Piastri, we're going to definitely talk about what happened to him. Lando had a thing. You can go up and down. I maybe the only ones that I don't know about are ones that didn't make TV. I didn't see Lance Stroll, but I'm sure he had to have a moment or two. And I didn't see much of Hulkenberg. But other than that, I think everybody who even finished this race had almost an oh crap moment.
Yeah, you got to definitely, with all the rookies and really anybody who retired from this race, we're going to hear a lot of conversation over the next week about several of them, particularly, probably Lawson, Doohan, Hadjar. And I feel like those conversations might be a little unwarranted because you're throwing these drivers into the deep end of the pool with this type of race. It would be hard for them to make an incredible debut on a completely dry track, and they had changeable conditions, wet track, they had it all. So despite the fact that they did look a little clumsy, I think it's almost expected, and I think we need to see what they can do in like a normal dry weekend, dry qualifying where it's not super hot, because that was a big contributing factor to weirdness in qualifying. Was it was really, really hot that day. And a dry race, we need to see something like that before we really start making judgment calls on, like, is Liam Lawson really the person who should be in that Red Bull seat? Does Isaac Hadjar deserve to be in the racing boat? We're going to hear that this week one way or the other, but I don't think.
I hope not, but I think you're right. The other thing I will say about that is a lot of these guys, especially if they come up from up F2, one thing I will point out is F2 has only one compound of wet tire. They only have a full wet. They don't have an inter. So this is the first time that any of these drivers, and don't forget, even though it did rain for 2 hours in Bahrain, and I think maybe Behrman went out on a set of inters, nobody else even brought inters. Yeah, nobody else even brought inters. So these guys have not even tested on that tire. And oh, by the way, there's a new Pirelli full wet that the first time we all saw it was when they went out to do their recon laps after the wave of water had hit the circuit. So, you talk about deep end of the pool. This is about as deep as you can get. And I'm not surprised that we had a lot of attrition. And yeah, I think experienced, inexperienced, to me, nobody should be making a whole lot of super judgments about anybody, whether or not they finish this race. This was, I think, again, Martin Brundle, I thought, said it best, just a race of survival more than anything. All right, so we will move into the midfield, and there was plenty to talk about in the midfield as well. P12 unable to convert the great qualifying form, probably something to do with the weather. That was Yuki Tsunoda. P11 was in the points until the very end, and then he had it off at turn 1, and that kind of ruined the rest of his race. Pierre Gasly and the Alpine, so they get out of here without any points. P10. Boy, we heard a lot of interesting team radio for one Lewis Hamilton, basically all trying to work out how to work with his new engineer. And I think Lewis's tactic was, will you leave me the hell alone and let me drive the car? But he only manages to come home in P10. We will talk about the Hail Mary that Ferrari almost pulled off in this race when we get to the lap 44 incidents, because there were lots of them. P9 recovering after one of the most heartbreaking spins I've ever seen for a local driver. He was probably on for the win. My prediction would have been almost perfect. He only manages to come home in P9. But I'll tell you, you want to talk about a recovery drive. Oscar Piastri pissed off is a dude. And because the move he pulls on Hamilton at the end, again, I'm telling you, this guy's got some mega overtakes in his racecraft. Oscar Piastri in P9. We will talk about his adventure. P8, Charles Leclerc, spin and recovery. Again, another Hail Mary strategy that didn't quite work out. Only managed to come home in P8. P7, everyone else screwed up, and this guy got lucky. Let's be honest here. I don't think this is really Kick Sauber's form, but hey, you finish where you finish, man. Nico Hulkenberg in the Kick Sauber comes home in P7. P6, Lance Stroll. Here's another guy. Don't think really that's where they're at, but again, you got to give it to them. This is where they finish. Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin. P5 was Alex Albon, and P4, we will talk about him as well. Andrea Kimi Antonelli on debut, up from P16 on the grid to finish P4, a restored P4, which we will talk about in just a little bit. It was a crazy midfield for sure. We had some guys definitely not where we thought they were going to finish. Cody, big takeaways here.
I think we have to tell the story of how some of these drivers ended up where they at, like Piastri, Hamilton. I think we have to kind of go through at least the broad strokes of the sequence of the race here. So
I'll try to set the stage a little bit here. So we started off, we were definitely in wet conditions, intermediate tires. There's the couple of wrecks before, there's the run wreck before the race happens, and then there's the doing wreck. And then we actually kind of finally, after about 8 or 9 laps under the safety car, actually got a few laps in and kind of settled in. And we were getting to a point where there was definitely a dry line that was clearly visible, that was definitely forming, because the rain, while there were some smatters of rain here and there, nothing super significant, we definitely got a dry line. So we were, the question was becoming strategy-wise, do you want to come in and box for another set of inters? And if so, or do we want to go back to slicks? Because if you go to slicks, you're only going to be able to really operate in that dry line, but it's going to be significantly faster. So as all of the strategy is slowly paying out, now the ominous weather message comes in from the teams to their drivers. Expected rain, class 3, which is very, very heavy. There's only 4 classes. This is class 3 out of 4. So this is like big, in Forrest Gump terms, this would be big old fat rain coming to the circuit. And everyone had at that point switched to the slick tires, especially after the Alonso spin and safety car. So that was, I think, safety car number 3 on the day. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was kind of amazed at that point that everyone ended up on the slicks because they had been talking about how the rain was coming and they had been trying to stick it out on the inters despite the fact that a lot of drivers were overheating on the inters. You could see a lot on the broadcast, Lando Norris and Max Verstappen having to go offline to try to cool off the tires. It did look kind of promising early on for those two drivers because Max was doing, we'll talk about it later, doing a decent job of keeping up for a while. But everyone's inters were starting to wear out. But they were kind of hemming and hawing, like, is it worth it? It's supposed to rain soon. And then after that, Fernando Alonso crash and they went to the safety car, everyone ends up on slick tires, which I thought Haas was going to go for the Hail Mary on this one because they looked like for a minute there that they were going to be staying on inters. And I was like, oh man, like that's kind of a wild call if you can make it work for a few laps because you'll be on inters if it starts raining. Everyone who just switched to those slicks, which was literally everybody else, is going to be going way slower and you might look like geniuses. But then kind of like at the last minute, they decided to pit for slicks anyway, which I thought was kind of silly. It's like, why didn't you do that earlier? If you're going to go for it, you really got to go for it. But, they pulled back on that. So, yeah, like you said, everyone on slick tires. And then it actually does start raining. And having everyone on slicks as the rain was coming down quite hard in certain parts of the track, it made it like a skating rink. It was really muddy there for a few minutes.
Yeah. So what they knew was going to happen was we were all saying it was going to be in Sector 3, and Sector 3, of course, is right before the pit lane. So and Sector 3, as we kind of talked about in our preview, is there's two almost 90-degree corners and a chicane before the main straight. So you're in dry conditions, you're taking that almost flat out until you get to the really slow speed, right? Until you hit that chicane right before the pit entry. And it was the McLarens who got there first because they were in P1 and P2 at the time, and they both went off almost in each other's tracks. And then it was the comeback that actually proved to be pivotal because Lando got back on the track and found enough grip to get it stopped to get into the chicane. And Piastri went off and instead of coming back off the gravel and onto the track, he goes through some of the grass, picks up some extra water on the tires. So when he hit the track, there was no grip and he just slid right off the chicane into the grass, which had been collecting water all day long. By some miracle, he manages to find reverse and get it out. But at that point, the entire field has passed him, and he's basically almost a complete and full lap down. So now we're on to this is the lap 44 mess that basically turned the entire race on its head. So once Lando had gotten back on, he comes into box. He's going back on to inters. Piastri's still stuck. Meanwhile, everybody else is trying to make decisions. And you've got George Russell, Yuki Tsunoda, and a few others that followed Lando in. And these were the guys who actually ended up making out on the deal because you still had Max Verstappen staying out. He takes over the lead. And both Ferraris in Hamilton and Leclerc, who's tried to stay out. Because the whole part with the shower was it wasn't going to last long. It was going to be quick, intense, and then done. And there wasn't anything behind it. So the home run strategy turned out to be if you could try to get these tires to the end, you might end up looking like a genius, especially if it doesn't completely coat the track. Well, that didn't happen. The rain had come in, and it was the class 3 that everyone was afraid of. Max eventually does have to pit, and then again the Ferraris kept him out of second lap. They do get overtaken by Lando. At this point, now we've got, I think it was the Bortoleto spin and the Lawson spin, which causes safety car number 4 on the day. That actually allowed Piastri, who has now gotten going and has changed his tires, to come back around because all lap cars get to overtake under the safety car. So that kind of brought him, believe it or not, back into the game somewhat, although his chances of winning, which were really good up until that point, were effectively ruined.
Yeah, I feel really bad for Piastri out of this, and maybe even worse than Isaac Hadjar, because he looked like he had a legitimate chance at winning that race. And starting off the season with a win, his home win would have been amazing. And there were a couple points before we got to that wet section where he was right on Lando's ass, and it looked like he was going to potentially take the lead. And we got to talk a little bit about the first race of the year team orders that McLaren kind of said that they weren't going to do, and then they looked at the conditions.
The 5-corner team order.
Yeah, they were like,
yeah, that.
Oh, it's kind of wet. Maybe don't race each other right now. We know you look pretty good, Oscar. And they told him. I love that they told him. Hey, hold position right now. We're hoping we're going to wait till it gets dry. And Piastri just goes, well, I'm faster, but okay. And yeah, I felt really bad at that point. You could tell that he was probably frustrated because it wasn't like till like another lap or two later, he ended up making like a small mistake and ended up falling a few seconds behind Lando Norris there. And then, who knows how they timed the stuff on the broadcast, but then we hear on the broadcast,
free to race.
Okay, now it's okay for you to race. And we're all going, well, of course, now you're going to freaking say that because he's way back behind him.
Yeah.
But
the actual team order lasted 5 corners because it was as both Lando and Oscar were coming up on the Haas's, and they were going to now, of course, you were going to have to go offline on worn inter tires to try to make a move. It definitely had hindered Lando because Oscar, you're right, got right up onto his tail. That's when they put the order in. By the time they said free to race, and they reminded, they just reminded both drivers, hey, they said the same thing on both radios. You guys are free to race. Just remember the rules of engagement and go. It was at that point that Oscar had an off on that turn 6 gravel, and that cost him like 3 seconds. Okay, so then he fell back.
So that happened after they told them that they could go race.
Correct.
Yeah, this is why, folks, it's good to listen to the radio for the drivers
and watch the onboards
because if you get a different narrative when you watch the broadcast than sometimes what's actually happening.
They were definitely trying to play up the whole, they're holding him back narrative, and I'm like, no, that's not what they're doing. Like, I got it in the moment. I wouldn't have said it, but I get it. If they touch and both cars wreck and you get no points out of a race where you could have had potentially 43 points, that's a huge thing to try to deal with. So they were going to let him go, and they did let him go as soon as I think both of them had cleared the blue flag cars. And then it was right after that Oscar had his little moment, and that was kind of leading up to the lap 44 where everybody had the moments. So
going back to that, I do really have to commend Piastri though for not giving up because he looked pretty beached there. Like you could see the tires spinning and you could see him not going anywhere. And I was like, when they went off and he went all the way across and I could see those tires spinning, I was losing my mind because I was thinking, oh my God,
I thought he was done.
They screwed it. They blew it. And Max was on. So the two of them were on hards, which I thought was really interesting that so many drivers seem to go on the hards because I'm sitting here thinking like it's wet, like off the dry line, and it could be getting like rainy here soon. Like, wouldn't you want a softer tire? And that's actually what Max did. He was on the medium, which I think probably helped him as the rain started coming off there. Had maybe a little bit more grip. But yeah, when Piastri was there spinning his wheels in the grass, a lot of drivers probably would have tried that for a minute and given up. And
I almost expected to see the pounding on the steering wheel, and then he hops out of the car.
But he managed to get it going, it's like slowly creeping back to the track, which really changed a lot in itself. Because if he was stuck there, it probably would have gone to probably a full safety car, I would think, with where he was at and the equipment they were going to need to get him. And they kind of seem to not like doing the virtual safety car when it's wet. But I digress. That could have really changed a lot if he had, been stuck in there was a safety car at that point, because at that point Max was out in the lead with a pretty good gap because he was, braving it on the mediums. He could have maybe made it around, gotten a cheap pit stop for inters, like, a lot of stuff.
I'll give you even a better scenario. What if they had thrown a red flag?
Oh my God. Yeah, that would have been
Max, Lewis, Charles all able to come in, change their tires because it was so wet that nobody could run. So if Piastri doesn't do that, and then you had on top of that the Bortoletto spin and the Lawson spin, there's an argument that you could have easily made that could have said they maybe should red flag this. And then we all know what happens when that happens. You all get the free tire choice coming out of that. And now you would have had Lando in 6th at that point.
I'm actually happy it didn't go that way because, as we all know, what we said about this, Lando wins the race, and as we're going to get into in a little bit here, I think that's what should have happened. But the chaos kept going. So Max Verstappen goes around a lap on the mediums, and at that point, I'm thinking like he should probably get on the inters. Now they decided to brave it another lap, and that's when Max was like, "Hey, we really need to make a call here. What am I going to do?" They called him in like seemingly last minute to get on the inters, and so I thought him staying out 2 laps on mediums was a bold call. The fact that Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton stayed out even longer than that on hards.
Ferrari just said, "Hold my beer."
Yeah, they're going out there, and the announcers are going nuts that Lewis Hamilton is leading the race on his debut with Ferrari. And I'm like, yeah, for like 5 seconds, because there's no way he's going to be able to keep going around like that. And yeah, he got past pretty quick.
Watching it from Lando's onboard, it looked like hot knife through butter type thing. Like it was just like Lando would go to turn, and then everybody else would just keep sliding off. And it was like, well, okay, you got there. And it was right after Lando passed Lewis that they called the safety car. So again, had you gone from safety car to maybe red flag, had Ferrari been able to keep it on the island, so to speak, there was an argument, again, that you could make that if you red flag it there, they could have gotten all that track position. Ultimately, it didn't work. And ultimately, they had to come in and abandon it because there was not going to be a red flag. And you have to kind of, at some point, you just have to keep the car on the track. So, they all come in, eventually get inters. That puts them kind of in the back of the queue. Now you've got Piastri circling back around. He rejoins, all on the lead lap now, though. I think it was P13. And then he actually had a moment where he passes Ocon, but it was before the line, so he had to give it back, and he lost like 5 seconds to the drivers in front. And like I said, this is when pissed off Oscar Piastri showed up, because he erased 5 seconds in 2 laps. So, like, you want to talk about there's still potential in that McLaren car? Holy buckets was there potential in that McLaren car. And then again, the move he makes on Lewis at the end. On the outside,
that was awesome.
There's nobody running that line that he drove. And he could have easily spun off again. But to make it stick and to hold it like he did, early contender for pass of the year. That's what I'm just going to tell you right now.
That was an awesome pass. The fact that Piastri came back to A, stay in the race, and B, get points was highly commendable. So, despite the fact that he was probably really frustrated with not getting what he deserved out of this race, which was a minimum of a podium, 2nd place. He still did a fantastic job. Ran a great race with the exception of that one very costly mistake. And it's crazy to me here looking at like the list for the midfield here. We've been talking about the midfield so long here. We still got so much to touch on.
We still haven't talked about where did Lance Stroll come from? Where the hell did Alex Albon come from? And how the hell did Kimi Antonelli go from 16th to 4th?
Yeah,
Cody, whichever one you want to go for, take it.
Well, before those, since we were talking about the Ferraris and they didn't look super great, I thought we would touch real quick on that Lewis Hamilton radio.
Oh yeah,
it was really a little strange listening to that, because Hamilton and his engineer, Bono from Mercedes, they had been working together for so long. They had a really tight relationship. They could pretty much say whatever they needed to each other, and you could tell that relationship obviously hasn't developed yet between Lewis and his engineer, because his engineer would come over the radio and tell him to do something, and Hamilton was being kind of strangely polite, being like, "No, I'm sorry, I'm not at the point where I want to do that. Leave me to it." They were talking about some kind of switch in the car and whatnot, and it seemed very strange, because then the engineer would come back on and like give the same instruction, and Lewis would be starting to get frustrated and be like, "No, I told you, leave me to it. I know what I need to do. Kind of doing a Kimi Räikkönen, like, stop. I know what I'm doing. Just lead me to it. I know what you're asking for. I'll do it when I'm ready. And so I think it's going to take a little while for them to work out those kinks. That's to be expected because they're working together for the first time, really. But
and again, like we kind of said, this is the most stressful type of race environment that you could have asked for on a debut. So I don't think that is a done and dusted thing by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think we're going to be seeing Hamilton coming home in P10 every race, but it was significant that the chemistry still has to. There's still a gelling process that even if you try to dedicate as many hours as Lewis did in the off season. There's nothing you can simulate everything to the nth degree. There is still no better crucible than a race in order to get it done.
The Kimi Antonelli bit, he had poor qualifying. We didn't really talk too much about his qualifying. Mercedes did some weird stuff in the qualifying with going out on mediums in Q1, which I think contributed to Kimi not being able to set a really, really representative time. So he's starting at the back. He does have a point where he goes off and has a spin during the race. It was in a pretty innocent place because it was a place where there was runoff and plenty of room for him to have that spin, not get any damage, get out on the track. So he lucked out a bit there. But all things considered, he really had a pretty amazing debut to finish. So he finished fourth place on track. He ended up receiving a penalty that put him 5 seconds down and therefore behind Albon. And then that decision was later successfully appealed by the team, who gave, they showed a camera footage from, I think, the onboard that I guess
it was the release during the safety car. The stewards had ruled that the Mercedes had done an unsafe release and had hindered Nico Hulkenberg from coming back on track. And then when they got the download of all of the onboards that they finally got access to, you could clearly see, if you're looking at Antonelli's onboard, Hulkenberg is not impeded. He's in the slow lane, but he's out, and he managed to get out in front of Antonelli. So where is your unsafe release? Stewards looked at it, ultimately agreed to rescind the penalty, which is something you don't usually see. Normally when we see right of review, I go, well, that's, dead on arrival. Maybe they'll do a hearing next week and then we'll find out it's dead on arrival. No, this one got sustained and they actually got the result changed.
But yes, he ends up having his fourth place finish on track reinstated. And the fact that he got there is really amazing. He ends up finishing behind his teammate, George Russell. So you got Mercedes in third and fourth, and I believe because of that, we'll talk that they're actually tied for first in the points because of all this nuttiness. But he's a rookie out there. He didn't even have any, couple races experience like some of the other rookies did from last year. And he went out there, mostly kept it on track, and ended up getting a very respectable finish out of it. So, I'm not really sure I'm 100% on the Kimi Antonelli hype train that's going right now, but he definitely impressed a lot more than I was expecting from this race.
Yeah, you definitely see the raw talent. You can understand why Toto Wolff gives him the gleam in the eye. I don't know that I'm fully sold on the kid yet either. I think there's a lot more that we're going to see throughout the course of this season in terms of consistency. And I think that's going to be the thing for all these rookies. I think they're going to show some flash moments, and they're going to show sometimes they're going to look very, very human. I mean, Ollie Behrman last year, great result in the Ferrari in Saudi Arabia. This weekend, I think he wants to forget about this weekend. He wants to get on the plane to China, land in China, and forget about ever touching down in Australia, because that weekend, it was bad for him. Let's be honest with it. So, yeah, definitely trial by fire, I think, for a lot of these guys.
And then lastly, as far as Lance Stroll goes, I honestly have no idea, man. I don't know how he got there. He barely had any TV coverage. I didn't even realize that he finished there until after the race was over and I was reviewing the results and was like, holy crap, where'd he come from? So I guess good race for him.
I mean,
got some good points.
It was he pitted after Lando did on the same lap, and so did Hulkenberg. And that was the decision that, as it played out, turned out to be the right one. Pitting on lap 44. If you pitted on lap 44, you definitely finished a little bit in front of those who didn't.
Nico Hulkenberg got more points for Kick Sauber in one race than they had last year. Completely.
And that money well spent, apparently.
Yeah, that's so they're already doing better. Look at that.
Yeah. So, and if that wasn't enough, we still haven't talked about after they went racing, everybody back on inters, because it still wasn't done. P3, I didn't see him at all in the race, but there he was at the end. George Russell in the Mercedes, he gets a podium finish. P2 and P1 went down literally to the end, only 0.8 at the end separating them. I think Lando Norris had to win this race 4 or 5 separate times, and each time there was the big boss man waiting for him at the end of the level. It's like getting to the end of a video game, and there's that guy again. There he was again. Max Verstappen, despite having an off early, despite getting passed by Oscar Piastri, manages to come home only 0.8 behind in the last 6 laps that were just as crazy as the laps that went before that safety car. Oh my God. Talk about heart attack if you're a McLaren fan. It basically came down to, I think gap was about 1.5 seconds going into the last couple laps, and then Lando had a moment on turn 6. That turn 6 gravel trap caught a lot of people out this weekend, and that enabled Max to get into DRS, and once he was in DRS, he was staying there. At one point, I think on the penultimate lap, it got to within 0.229 on the timing. I was scared out of my mind. I figured, it was going to happen again. We've seen the history, we know the history, but not to be. Maybe this is the start of a different narrative for Lando Norris. I sure as hell hope it is. But he manages to hold him off at the end and take the win. But Max did not make it easy, man.
No, and I do want to gush about Max here in a minute. But before I do that, I do have to say that I think Lando Norris 100% deserved to win this race. He was pretty much in control of it throughout the entire race. He did have that off in the gravel, but he ended up recovering. He ended up recovering to the lead through all that craziness. Max made himself very present throughout this entire race and definitely showed you, as we've discussed many times, that you can never count out Max, because no matter what he's driving, he's going to squeeze something out of it. But Lando had to hold off Oscar Piastri. He had to hold off Max Verstappen several times. And he had to deal with Max breathing down his neck at the very end of the race, which would be pretty intimidating, I would think, considering how crazy Max has been in those types of situations before. But yeah, he holds on to the win. I think it was well deserved. It really shows how much skill Lando Norris has. There's been a lot of talk in the media about, is he really ready to make a stronger push for Drivers' Champion? And I think this race really shows that he does have what it takes, that he's able to withstand the pressure. And I think we're going to see great things from him.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I mean, I feel like I'm like, oh, thank you. Very well said there. I couldn't agree with you more. I had a very, very healthy respect for actually how both of those guys raced each other. It was clean. It was good stuff. Yeah, it was close, but Max didn't do anything, overly stupid. There wasn't anything wrong with what he did. I mean, Lando goes off in the gravel with 2 laps to go, and Max closed up on him. And, it would have taken a Piastri-esque move, I think, at the end, that could have maybe taken both of them out. And I think even Max, I think in the post-race, kind of said, you know what, I'm kind of happy with a P2 considering where the car was and where everything else was. And look, I'm going to say some nice things about Max here. He dragged that car to that P2. Mm-hmm. There was several times where I thought, okay, I can finally start to relax. One was in the first stint, like Max was right on Lando's ass for about the first 15, 20, 25 laps. And then all of a sudden it was like the tires just shut off. And it was like, okay, here's our advantage. we're finally going to open up the gap. And they did. They opened up like a 15-second gap to him. And I'm like, okay, we're fine. Then the Fernando Alonso spin. Then we had the rain thing come. And every time something else got thrown, there was Max right in the background. Here he was again. And that's what champions do. I mean, look, I would have said the same thing if it was Hamilton that would have done the same thing, or anybody else. But that's why he is who he is. This is why it has been his era of these cars, because he's able to do exactly that. And yeah, I mean, like I said, I thought Lando won this thing 4 different times and one more at the end. So it was literally like, you couldn't bet against Max 5 times and then once more once he was out of the race, because oh my God, what a great drive by him. I was very, very impressed, especially considering where that car was in testing, where that car was even on Friday to where it was on Saturday and Sunday. Great recovery.
All right, so now I am going to gush about Max a little bit. He had a great start to the race. He almost looked like he was going to get in the lead, but then, until Lando made the move to block him off, but he still got by Piastri on lap 1. He held on to Lando for as long as he could and looked like he was really struggling with the car to stay close to Lando because the car was wobbling all over the place through the turns. He was really pushing hard to keep it there. At one point, he does have a little bit of a mistake where the car locks up in the wet, manages to keep it right from going into the gravel, but he loses the position to Oscar at that point. And I'm thinking, okay, we're going to the McLaren 1-2. Then all that craziness happens. He manages through some pit sequences, and we're going to preface here that yes, he was helped out by safety cars. That is just how it goes. That helps him, close up those gaps, despite the fact that McLaren was romping away to an easy 1-2. But they make calls with the different tire strategy. He's on the mediums. He capitalizes when the McLarens have their off. He tries to stay out there on the slicks as the rain's coming down. For 2 laps, struggling through that, manages to keep it on the track and still in the lead. Can't do it anymore. Following that craziness, pit sequence and everything, though, and the Bortoletto/Lawson incidents, suddenly we're down to the last few laps, and he's in second place behind Lando. And Lando has to be sitting there looking in his mirrors going, God damn it, you're back. Why are you here again? And they finally get on that last green flag sequence, and Lando starts to pull away a little bit. And I'm thinking, okay, it's over. He's going to be able to finish in second still, which is way better than what I was expecting before. It did kind of seem to be in 3 tiers at the beginning of the race there. You had the McLarens pulling way out. You had Max keeping up for as long as he could, but then falling off as it seems that the tires were not working as well on the Red Bull as they were on the McLaren. And then a pretty good gap back to George Russell. But so at that point, I'm thinking Max is going to be able to at least hold on to what he's got. But then I'm looking at the timing screen, and all of a sudden it shrinks way back down, and it's under half a second because Lando had that incident that you mentioned before that they didn't show on the broadcast, which is kind of disappointing. They were showing something else, and I'm watching the timing screen,
right?
And they went to like some kind of replay, and I was really pissed off because I was like, no, I want to see what's happening at the lead right now. And right after that, the FIA decides, okay, we're good to do DRS again. And
yeah, I about died when I saw that one. I'll admit, I about died when I saw that. I'm like, of course they're going to re-enable it with a lap and a half to go.
They probably were seeing like, ooh, this could be a spicy situation. Let's make it easier for him to get a pass.
No, and it's the right call based on what the conditions were. So I mean, I got it, but at the same time, just the timing of it was like, here's one more heart attack. I was like, really? Now? Why? Damn it!
And my heart was like just about beaten out of my chest because, for one thing, we've established many times, big Max fan. Nobody thought he was going to come in and win this race. I didn't think he was going to win this race. And yet here we are in the last couple laps, and it's within grasp. And I'm thinking, God, I'm going to go nuts if he somehow pulled this off. And I don't want to see what you're doing if Lando somehow loses this right at the end through some series of like miracles on Max's behalf. But Now, Lando does manage to hold him off, but Max was right there. I think he finished less than a second behind
8 tenths.
Lando there at
And
the
that
end.
was the biggest gap of the whole final lap, by the way.
Mhm.
Was right at the end.
Yeah.
Because now it was interesting, the strengths of both of their respective cars. And I don't know if Red Bull, I want to say they consciously made this decision in the practices. And for all the talk that sometimes we said that the practices aren't indicative, you could see something with how both of these cars were making their lap times. The second sector, which is pretty much all flat out, I don't know if they, and I want to read in some of maybe the post-mortem of this race, it did Red Bull make a conscious decision to take some of the rear wing downforce off because they were flying in the straight lines down into that second sector. Where McLaren was making its lap time was in the third sector, and specifically the last couple of corners, because they were pretty much even in the first sector. Red Bull was definitely in front by a couple of tenths in the second sector, and then it was that third sector that the McLarens could keep their tires in it long enough to really make the lap time. So when we were coming out of that second sector, and it's like I said, 0.229, it was all to play for going into that last little bit there.
Mm-hmm. But so it came down much closer than I think anyone was expecting. I'm very happy with what Max managed to get out of this. He got second place in really a race that Red Bull probably had no right getting that second place. And yeah, he was helped by safety cars. He was helped by weather. He was helped by mistakes by, especially the McLaren drivers. But that stuff all happens, and you got to be there to capitalize when that stuff happens. Yep. And he was there. So do I think it's going to be a real struggle, even for him to keep up with McLaren's, at least as things look right now? Yeah, that McLaren car looks really, really good. It looked really good in qualifying. It looked really good once that dry line got established and they started pulling out ahead. It looked really easy on the tires. Like they got the car to win right now. And, we were all hoping that this was going to be a really close season between a whole bunch of teams. And I don't know, man. Like, it's only one race that we've seen so far, but I'm not sure that that's the way it's going to be. It's a long season. There's a lot of development, but, a lot of people are going to be trying to put attention on the next season at some point. And at that point, if McLaren's still way out in front, a lot of other teams might just be to hell with it. We'll come back next year. So there's a lot to see.
Yeah, I mean, there's my fan part of it that is jumping up and down and doing cartwheels, especially when I saw the qualifying time. And then there's the other part of me that is big picture that also says, I want this to be fun. I don't want it to be, I want a couple of 20-second wins. I'll be honest, but I don't want that all the time. I mean, that's just not fun. It's not fun for anybody. Whether it's
Lando in Great Britain, 30 seconds, fine. That'll do.
Exactly. I mean, he can finally take that one and get that again monkey off of his back. And if he wants to do that at Coda when I'm going down there in October again, I'm more than happy for that too. Yeah. But other than those two, let's have it at least be competitive and let's be fun. That said, McLaren never makes it easy on themselves. They're going to provide opportunities, I think, throughout the course of this season, just because they do, and because nobody is perfect, even if you have the best car. It's especially in a race like this one, where, like, again, I keep coming back to any corner could have provided an opportunity to crash at any point for a lot of guys. So I don't know. I still want to say that the prognosis on the season is still a little incomplete, but it's definitely leaning McLaren's way early for sure.
Mm-hmm. But despite all that, as we've told you over the course of a while here now, even with McLaren having what seemingly clearly the best car, it still came down to the wire. It was still wildly exciting and probably the best debut race of a season that we've seen in a long time in terms of not being sure what's going to happen.
Yeah, keep having Australia be the opener. Don't. Yes. No offense against Bahrain. I'm sure they're nice people and all that other good stuff, but keep Australia as the opener because this one was a
the
banger.
under the lights thing in Bahrain. That part's cool, but as far as like the fandom and the interest of the race, I think Australia is the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, I guess that kind of takes us to the end. I think we've actually got it all in. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to re-rack. We're going to come back. We will tell you what the driver standings have. There is something that has not happened since 2022 that is now a reality. We will also look at where the team standings are. Very, very tight up at the top. In fact, there's no margin up at the top. Believe it or not, it's Countback that's setting the order. We will then open it up to your reaction on what you saw in the fan email segment. We've got a lot of our regulars here. We've done a lot of those interactions, and we will get their feedback on the race. We'll hand out some awards, and then we don't have time to rest because the Chinese GP, believe it or not, free practice 1 is only like 4 days away. So come on back. We're going to get into all that in just a little bit.